So, is anybody familiar with a project called Oakland Crime Spotting? Oakland Crime Spotting, for those of you that don't know, is a project very similar to the ones you're describing and has a lot of the drawbacks and pitfalls that you're describing. It basically uses the Oakland Police Department's crime data, felony data, misdemeanor data. And it plots it on, uses the Google Maps API, and it plots this data on a map of Oakland, California. So you can scrub back and forth, and you can see what kinds of crimes get committed in what neighborhoods, nominally and notionally. And it's by a company called Stamen Design in San Francisco. It's very beautiful, it's very compelling, it's very seductive. And I approach it with a lot of the same skepticism that you do. I mean, I ask, well, really, what is your risk, in everyday life in Oakland? Is your risk really coming from these factors, or is your risk coming from, the pollution? Or the hamburger at McDonald's that you just ate, which is more likely to kill you? Is it a kid with a kosh who's going to hit you over the head in a dark alley, or is it the collective decisions that we make that lead to bad outcomes? So I have some of that skepticism, and I expressed some of the skepticism to Oakland Crime Spotting's makers, and their response was, okay, you may have a point in the abstract, but we have the reality of people printing these visualizations out, civilians, right? People who had never really before thought about the relationship between civic data and their experience and their political agency. People printing these maps out, going to their police precinct, watch commander at the public meeting, and banging these visualizations on the table and saying, how come I don't have more police coverage in my community? Now, I'm the first person to be skeptical, again, the second order skepticism about whether more police really has any correlation, what kind of policing are, what they're there for, how they're trained, all of that. But there's something really exciting to me about this coupling, if you will, between raw numbers and political action, which was mediated by the act of collection and the act of representation. And I think that closes a loop in a way that maybe wouldn't have been possible a couple of years ago. And I'm one of these people, you can call it incrementalism, but I happen to think that anybody who shows up at a police precinct meeting to demand something of the police, watch commander, I have to think that's kind of a good thing. And if that's crystallized or catalyzed by these visualizations, I'm almost willing to forgive all of their pretty severe drawbacks, because it's gotten one person to go and demand something of the public, of the institutions that have been entrusted with their health and safety. And if that is happening, even at that small level, if that's reproducible, then as far as I'm concerned, that's a good outcome. It's very, very hard for me to argue back at that if it's teaching people how to demand things.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think that so long as the exercise results in people questioning the data that was produced, or questioning something about why the data was produced that way, that's fine.
Because, yeah, I mean, one of the other effects of this visualization is that, feminist groups have basically said, well, you don't have a category for forcible rape on here. And they blame the map maker, they blame Stamen, they blame the designer. And what happens is that, this winds up being expressed in an email to a guy named Mike McGursky, who's basically like, the most conscious and sweethearted guy in the whole world. He gets all of this angry mail. And what he has to do is explain back to people that, as a matter of fact, the Oakland Police Department doesn't collect data that way. They only recognize a category, it's called aggravated assault. So, except in their internal logs, their taxonomy of crime simply doesn't account for the one that's of most interest to this particular core constituency. And so even accidentally, I think this visualization is producing good outcomes. I think it is clarifying the taxonomy by way of which crime data is collected and reported to the public. And again, if those sorts of conversations are happening around this, even as flawed as it might be, as partial as it might be, I think those are exactly the kinds of conversations that need to be
had. I definitely agree. And sure, I'm also a big fan of Stamen stuff. I think, however, again, in the spirit of incrementalism, I would say that the next step would be to say, here's a visualization, here are the tools through which you critique that visualization.
Yeah.
Let's just let's say that is what you have to deliver if you ever deliver the visualization. Or here are the steps through which, I don't know,